Welcome to episode 40 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm interviewing Markus Blunder. Markus is a writer and director. He recently completed a feature film called Autumn Blood, and we dig into some of the specifics about how that film came about, so stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread the word about the podcast. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. If you find all the podcast show notes you can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts and just look for episode number 40. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. Just a quick update about what I'm working on. I had a few people email me and ask me about some of the comments I made on the last episode about the option I recently did with a producer on my film noir mystery screenplay. He wants to make some major changes to the screenplay that I don't agree with. So the gist of the emails I got was, why are you willing to work with this producer if you think he's going to make a lousy film? The problem I'm facing is an age-old problem for screenwriters. If you're ever going to be a professional writer, you will face it. I remember when I optioned my first screenplay, Dish Dogs. At the time, I was reading Jack London's Martin Eden. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend you check it out. It's a great book for writers to read for a whole variety of reasons. And I'm going to talk about one of the reasons right now. About halfway through the book, the character of Martin Eden begins to sell a few poems, but the editors drastically rewrite them. The character of Martin Eden was absolutely outraged. I realized then, I was reading this book, as I said, right when Dish Dogs was being optioned, and the producers there were starting to do some rewrites on Dish Dogs. And I realized that that was where I was in my career. I had just optioned my first script, and I thought that I was off to the big leagues. But then the producers started to rewrite my script and, in my opinion, destroy it. And unfortunately, I've just never been able to get past that point in my career. So part of the answer to this question is simply that a professional writer must man up and take the professional gigs that he's offered. It's not like I've got dozens of other offers where producers want to option my scripts and not make changes to them. This process, as painful as it is part of screenwriting. So you've got to be prepared for it if you're serious about having a career as a screenwriter. I think another part of the equation is that I'm an eternal optimist. Before you really get into the nitty-gritty of the situation, I guess I just didn't realize how bad things were going to get in terms of the rewrite. So while I knew this producer wanted to make some big changes before I signed the option agreement, I guess I just didn't think it through enough. One thing I like about this producer, though, is that he's a real hustler, and I have no doubt that he's going to produce a few movies over the next decade. He's smart, he's motivated, so he's going to make some films, and that's a lot more than I can say for most of the people I meet in this town. So at some point, you've got to just try and attach your wagon to a train that is actually going to leave the station. And so, maybe it is a deal with the devil in some ways, but, it's not like there's a lot of other options. As I said, most of the producers or wannabe producers that I meet, I'm not just convinced that they're really going to make a movie. This guy's going to make some movies. It may not be my movie, but he's going to make some movies. So that's an important point, and it's something to really consider when you're working with people, is how serious they are and how, looking at it honestly, how likely do you really think it is that they're going to make a movie? This guy will make some more movies. So, if you're going to go into business with someone, it might as well be someone who actually is going to get it done. But I would say the main reason I signed this option agreement and went into business with this producer is because on some level we get along with each other. This may seem odd considering what I've described, but we're still on speaking terms. And while we don't agree with each other on the creative level, we are still communicating. And I feel like we still communicate pretty well. And that's a lot more than I can say for some of the other producers I've dealt with. Many of the producers I've worked with, I've told them what I think of their ideas, and they've gotten quite offended. And I've essentially never heard from them again. So this producer, he doesn't like what I'm saying, but he's at least still talking to me and potentially listening to what I'm saying. And that's a big thing. And from the very start, when we met each other, we had a good rapport, a good back and forth where we could speak honestly to each other, and we didn't take it personally or get offended. And I can't tell you how important that is. I mean, working with people that you can communicate with, even if you don't get along, it's very, very important. So we have that going for us. Ultimately, I think I can write a script that he'll like, but it's essentially writing him a completely new screenplay, which I'm open to, but it's going to take many months. So that's the issue now. He wants something in a couple of weeks, and I don't feel like I can make the major changes that he wants that quickly. He thinks they're simple and easy to implement, and at this point, it's not even that I think his ideas are worse than mine or anything like that. It's just really that I don't think I can write him a decent script with these huge changes in just a couple of weeks. There's a variety of reasons why he needs a script quickly, and they're perfectly legitimate reasons. I don't necessarily want to get into all of that now, but producers are on a time schedule. They do have certain deadlines that they need to make. There are certain things that are going on, meetings that he's involved in. So there are some reasons why he needs it quickly, but I just don't think I can deliver a good script in that time frame. So we've at least come to some sort of a temporary resolution, which I think actually works well for both of us. He's going to take a pass at the script. He's going to get final draft, open up the script, and just start making his changes. Maybe he'll be able to write something he's happy with in a week or two. We'll see. As I said, after today's conversation, it seems like we're still communicating well. So I'm still hopeful that maybe he'll realize that to write a really good script is going to take some time, and he'll come back to me and he'll help me. He'll let me help him whip it into shape. And that's the great thing. As I said, I think we're still communicating well, and I definitely was very clear to him that, listen, if you want some help on this script, I'm here to help, and I'm happy to dig in and do the rewrites you want. So I'm kind of hoping, that's kind of my hope now, is that he'll do this pass that he is going to do, and he'll decide that it's not that great, and he'll come back to me, and then we can kind of get to work. But it's going to take months. I mean, it's basically a page one rewrite, and that's fine. You gotta write the script for the producer on some level, but it's just not something that I can do that quickly. And I think he understands that, and he kind of understands my position. So we'll just see. We'll see how it turns out. Just as an aside, I'm going to be skipping this section in the podcast where I give updates for probably the next 8 weeks. I've got a ton of podcast interviews recorded, so I'm actually batching them out. I'm recording all the basically the footer and the header, which is the part like I'm doing right now, talking into the camera. I'm basically going through all of these interviews that I've recorded, and I'm just recording that front piece and back piece in a big batch. I'm doing it all this week. I just want to see if that's not a more efficient way to do this, the podcasts, and then I don't have to worry about every week producing a new episode. I'll have 8 of them in the can. Takes us up, I think, to about Thanksgiving. So there will be some things that I'm going to lose, like this section. But as I said, I just want to see if it's not a more efficient way to produce the podcast. Just batch them out maybe once every month or every other month, and then upload them. On your end, you're not going to see a lot of difference. I'm still going to just basically set them to publish on Monday every week. So they'll be publishing at the same time, but I'm actually producing the episodes ahead of time. And in some cases, the episodes will be 8 weeks old by the time you actually listen to it. So obviously, I'm not going to have these kind of real-time updates on my own career for a little while. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into the main interview. Today, I'm going to be talking with director and writer Markus Blunder. Here is the interview.
Welcome, Markus, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, same here. Thanks for having me.
So to start out, I wonder if you can give us a quick overview of your career and how you got into the entertainment industry.
I started, I was always into photography, actually. As a kid already, I had my own darkroom. I had like a couple of old beat-up cameras. I was converting Polaroid cameras into multi-Polaroid cameras, and I then made a short stint in a film school. It didn't fit my kind of very crafty and in a way I like to get my hands on cameras and stuff, and in the film school it was a little bit more difficult. So I I had night jobs. I was working in restaurants and bars, and in the daytime I was volunteering for production companies. That brought me quite quickly to be working on American productions, big American productions, shooting over here in Europe. And the money I made, I invested in producing, writing, directing short films. That led to winning a few awards internationally for short films. Latest ones were at the Houston World Fest, the biggest non-commercial short film festival in the world, actually. And there I got picked up by a headhunter who invited me to come to LA for a week to meet a few production houses that were just doing music videos and commercials. I did, and I never left.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So let's talk about your latest film, Autumn Blood, which you directed, produced, and co-wrote. Maybe you can give us the log line for it in case people haven't seen the trailer yet.
Sorry, I didn't hear you completely.
Okay, sure. So let's go ahead and talk about your latest film, Autumn Blood. I wonder if you can give us the log line for the film in case people have not seen the trailer.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, of course, yeah. Basically, Autumn Blood is about two young children growing up in a very remote mountain farm. The father had passed away years ago. He was murdered by another guy, and the children continued to live with their mom up on the mountain. Years later, the mom dies of hardship from just working the two kids up in very hard circumstances. She dies, and the children decide not to talk about it with anyone so that they wouldn't be separated by social services. And they bury their mom and they continue their lives. What they didn't know is that the death of the father had a dark prehistory in a village close by, small village close by, and that dark history catches up with them now that they're unprotected by a father and a mother, and they have to fend for their lives emotionally and physically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds riveting. It sounds very similar. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, it sounds similar to something like Winter's Bone.
Yeah, yes, definitely. I love Winter's Bone. It's an excellent film, and it's a great genre comparison, yes.
Yeah, so maybe you can kind of tell us where the story came from. How did you get involved with the script, or how did you get involved with this story?
Basically, I myself grew up in a small, remote town in the Alps, and I used to spend all my childhood on a remote mountain farm in a small, remote mountain village that has only like 7 farms, and I always remember that there was things people didn't talk about, things that had happened before in the small town, stories of inbreed and sexual abuse, and I always remember that it was very scary for me as a little kid. And then when I was about 27, I met again a girl that used to grow up with me up there in that remote region, and we talked about exactly that, how the kids we would be scared of all those dark stories of murders, of thieves, of wilderers, we call them, so the guys hunting the animals without permission and slaughtering them and stuff. And then, as the evening continued, she told me a very personal story from her life. It was something that had happened to her, and that never really got. She never really got. I think it's vindicated. Nobody ever really talked about it. Kind of got buried, and she felt only 20 years later or 15 years later be able to talk about it. And that's why I want to tell this story. And it's basically almost a true story, you know.
Mm-hmm. You co-wrote the film with writer Stephen Barton. I wonder if you can maybe talk just quickly about sort of the logistics of working with him, and how did that work? Did he write a first draft and then you took a pass at it, or vice versa, or did you guys sit in the same room and write it?
No, basically what we did is I wrote the story outline, and then I brought Stephen over from the United States. I felt that it was necessary to write the story in an alpine environment rather than in a big city. Stephen lives between New York and Los Angeles. And he came over, and we then sat down every day and worked for about 4 weeks. And then Stephen went back to LA, and then he continued there to finalize the draft and polish it. And then I took during the shooting, I took another step at cutting some dialogue. We had a little bit more dialogue in it. Actually, I cut out some more dialogue in the end. But it was a great collaboration. Stephen is an amazing writer, really.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you can just speak briefly to how did you guys go about raising the money for this? I'm always just curious. I get a lot of writers asking me, "Hey, I've written a script. I want to produce it myself." And so, how did you raise the money, and maybe some tips for writers and producers about how they can raise the money?
Yeah, basically, wow, it's a big conversation. But in general, in Europe, there's something besides incentives, which we also have in the States. Which is tax credits. We also have film grants put in place by the government to make sure that the local film industry culturally gets developed further, so that films are being made, and also economically, so that people in the film industry can further develop their craft and have jobs. Now, particularly on Autumn Blood, we did not go this route because Stephen and I had just developed another script that is called Cross Your Heart. It's a beautiful dark love tale between a teenage boy and a very mysterious girl that he encounters in the winter in the mountains. And I was raising the money for this film, and I realized that in this particular year the winter was getting too short, and I dropped the film for the time being, and I always wanted to do Autumn Blood. I always wanted to tell the story of my friend, but I was always a little bit scared because it's a very dark sujet. And I finally said, wow, no, this story should be told. And basically, Stephen came over and we wrote the whole thing in 4 to 6 weeks. And then I had only about 8 weeks to raise the money, when we already had to start scouting and prepping. The way I basically financed it is almost entirely private equity, with the exception of local tax credits. As a tip for any writer or producer, write the best script you can write, because I think there's a lot of demand out there for great stories and good scripts. And once you feel you have it, don't be shy to approach any route. Look up producers you like, films that do films that you relate to, that you believe could relate to your sensibility, and try to contact them through social media, whatever, official channels, agents. There's all the roads lead to Rome, but the one thing is the road has to be paved well. If you want to be fast, you have to have a good script. But there's always money out there for great content,
Yeah. So what's the best way for people to watch Autumn Blood? Is it going to get a theatrical release? Is it available on video on demand?
Right now, we actually are having a theatrical release. Our distributor, ARC, U.S. distributor, North American distributor, ARC Entertainment, is headlining our release starting tomorrow, September 19th, in selected cities. We have 10 cities, including LA and New York. We also have a date day and date release. We have video on demand. We have almost all the digital platforms are taking in Autumnblatt.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So what's the best way for people to just keep up and follow you? Are you on Twitter? Do you have a blog or a website? You can just list, tell us what that is, and I'll put it in the show notes for people to click over.
Great. In the moment, we have, of course, a Facebook Autumnblatt page, and we are just building up our Twitter. So Facebook has all the other links.
Perfect. I'll definitely link to that. I'll track that down and link to that in the show notes if anybody wants to follow it. Markus, you've been very generous with your time. This has been really interesting. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me today.
Same here. Thanks for the time, and thanks for looking at our film and talking about it.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, again, just as a last note, we are always looking for great scripts, also my partners and myself, so don't be shy.
Perfect. Will do. Thank you much, Markus.
I'm going to be running another online class called Before You Begin to Write Your Screenplay. I'm going to be discussing the various steps that you should be taking before you begin to actually write your screenplay. I'll be showing you the exact process that I use. I see too many screenwriters who begin writing before they're ready, and what happens is they end up with a screenplay just chock full of problems. And once that first draft is written, it becomes difficult to fix problems that could have been easily fixed in the outlining stage. This class is the second one in the series of classes that I'm doing that will guide you through the entire screenwriting process, from coming up with a marketable concept to outlining and writing your screenplay to marketing your screenplay to agents and producers. If you missed the first class, that's not a problem. I recorded it and have put it into the SYS Select forum for you to listen to at your leisure. This class is going to be on Saturday, October 18th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. If you'd like to learn more about this class, go to www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/classes. Like the last class, I will also be recording this one, so if you listen to this after October 18th, again, that's not a problem. The classes are recorded and put in the SYS Select library, so you can check those out really at any time in the future. And to learn more about SYS Select, just go to www.sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. In the next episode of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Alejandra Siri and Johnny T. Silver. Their first spec sale was recently produced, and they go into some great detail about how they got that script sold. These are two really hardworking and smart guys, and they have a lot of great information to share, so keep an eye out for that episode next week. To wrap things up, I just want to touch on a few things from today's interview with Markus. I've gotten in with a publicist who is promoting movies similar to Markus Blunder's Autumn Blood, and they're passing me a lot of these interviews that you're hearing on this podcast. It's been a great asset to the podcast because I feel like I'm getting really good people to interview, and obviously they're getting some publicity for their current films. So it's a fantastic relationship. However, sometimes, like today, they don't give me a lot of time to conduct the interview, so I do apologize for not going as deeply into some of the answers as I normally like to do. And one of those things that he kind of got into a little bit, but I didn't dive in a lot further, was about the financing of this film. He talked about grants and European financing. This is something that I know virtually nothing about, so I will try and get someone onto the podcast in the future that knows more about this and really drill down into it. Even just for my own education, I think it's interesting and important to understand how European films are financed. One of the things I feel like is becoming more clear to me, especially with these sorts of independent genre films, is that you've either got to be a director or you've got to be real in with a director like the co-writer of this film that I just talked about with Markus. I almost feel like being a writer is like being a songwriter, but not being a performer. Whereas if you write and direct, you're more of a complete package. You'll be seeing more of this over the next few weeks from the interviews that I'm going to be sharing. There are a lot of writer-director combinations or writer-producer combinations. It just really seems like that's the best way to really start to take control of your career. So I've been considering this and trying to figure out what sort of angle I should take to move more into this direction. I have done some producing, so I'm really thinking I need to probably do more of that. And when I say producing, really what that means is going out and raising the money. But even if you want to be a writer-director, at the beginning stages, it's going to mean you raising the money as well, probably doing some shorts, doing what Mark has talked about here, doing some shorts, getting to some press and some publicity for those shorts. But it's really going to involve you writing, directing, probably also producing your own material. So if you're listening to this, I would say just keep that in mind and start to ponder that as you go forward. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.